Wait, you're that pair of shoes I threw out last week. The ones that kept smelling like fish farts.
We just had some bad bacteria in Oz.
You could have used baking soda to stop the smell.
Sorry, you two. It's just, you were also kind of old and I'd gotten a new pair of red razzle-dazzle running sneakers, so...
Silence!
We've come with two important messages.
Oh my.
We've seen what happens to stuff when it's thrown out.
It doesn't just disappear. It remains on Earth, waiting to break down and become one with the planet again, waiting a very long time.
And some plastic things never break down. They just sit there. And they won't stop telling you about how long they've been sitting there. It's really annoying.
Right? That old retainer would not stop yapping.
Ugh. It's like we get it. You're from the 80s. People hated anchovies on pizzas back then. Whatever.
Okay, but what does this have to do with me?
Silence! I love doing that.
You're really good at it.
Thanks. Ahem. The first message is you must help deal with the problem of too much trash.
Me? What can I do? I'm just a girl with adorably curly hair and a plucky attitude.
You must use your powers of podcasts to tell the world about what happens to trash and why we should try to throw away fewer things.
To help you, you will be visited by 3 visions. One from the past, one from the present, and one from the future. Heed them, hear them, learn from them.
Okay, what was the second message?
Oh, right. Marc says it was your turn to load the dishwasher. And you forgot!
We accidentally stopped at his room first, and he told us to tell you that.
Okay, I'll get right on it after I finish sleeping for the night. Huh? Oh, it's morning. I guess it was all a dream.
Molly! You forgot to load the dishwasher, and now none of my cereal whisks are cleaned. You know I hate poorly mixed cereal.
Or was it? You're listening to Brains On from American Public Media. I'm Molly Bloom, and my co-host today is Krisha from Shoreview, Minnesota. Hi, Krisha.
Hey, Molly. Thanks for calling me up to do this episode on trash. Sorry to hear it was inspired by a weird dream. Those talking ghost shoes sound stressful.
Yeah, but I figured, hey, it never hurts to think about the waste we're making every day and what happens to it. Plus, we've gotten some great questions on this topic, like this one.
Hi, this is Mirabella. And I'm Cameron. And we were wondering, why do we have garbage? We recycle and compost, but also have garbage, and we're wondering.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's presentation. Air and Sound Path are excited to present what we've learned about kids podcasting with the team at Brains On. If they want to turn their cameras on, that would be awesome. Hi, Molly, Menaka, Marc, Sanden, hello. I'm going to do a quick introduction here, and then I will leave you to your presentation. I would just let everyone in the audience know that today's presentation will be recorded and will be available on Air Media and SoundPath. And that if you have questions, please use the Q&A feature in your webinar, which is at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Okay, so a quick introduction. When Molly Bloom was in college, she hosted a radio show for kids. She graduated and started a career in public radio, but the idea of making something for young listeners never really left her head. Later, she asked her Minnesota public radio colleagues, Sanden, Totten, and Marc Sanchez, if they wanted to try making a podcast for kids, because why not? It took about a year for the first episode to come out, but they did it. And soon after, kids started writing in and parents began telling each other about this fun, educational, screen-free podcast. The momentum eventually landed the trio full-time jobs producing the show. And then bam, seemingly out of nowhere, but actually out of UC Berkeley, Menaka Wilhelm showed up, an actual scientist with a passion for science communication. Now, there's a small but mighty team that has enabled the show to grow beyond the science podcast. Spinoffs, Smash, Boom, Best, and Forever Ago are all a part of the ever-growing list of shows that are helping to shape the landscape of kids podcasting. Welcome, Brains On team. Take it away.
Thank you for having us. We are really excited to be here. You just met all of us. This is us again, hi, in our natural habitat in a hallway with a blue background. That was the last time we were all able to hang out in person. Since the pandemic, we've been doing a lot of this, having our heads in boxes, so this is very comfortable. So thanks everyone for being here. I'm Molly, the host of the show, also one of the producers.
I'm Sanden, one of the reporters on the show, also a producer. I'm the one in the white shirt there.
I'm Menaka. I am a producer on the show. I'm in gray.
And I'm Marc. I'm producer and one of the co-creators of the show as well.
So so as Aaron just said, we started the show about 10 years ago. We just wanted to make something fun that really engaged our creativity and made something for kids because they're so awesome. And we started, piloting with a few core values that are still shaping the show today. One is that we don't talk down to kids. Another is we want to highlight kids' voices, and we want to show kids, all parts of kids, their curiosity, their silliness, and also their seriousness. So we made our first pilot episode. We put it on a Tumblr. You remember Tumblr? This was our link that we were sending.
Throwback.
Yeah.
Wow.
Friends and family.
Where did you even find that?
Oh, the link is still active, so you can still find our Tumblr. We have kid co-hosts in every episode, so I'm the host along with a different curious kid. Our kid co-host for this first episode is now an adult. He's in college. Look at him. He grew up so well. And we made the show in our free time as a passion project for about 5 years. Over those 5 years, we started making monthly episodes, and we started making episodes every other week. And the audience grew very organically through word of mouth. And eventually there was a big enough audience for it to become our full-time jobs.
Yeah. And so here we are I think this is shortly after it became our full-time job. So we're like, we're going to dress up like ants and do an episode about ants. This is the Ant News Network. We made a video about it. It was super goofy and way fun and kind of exemplifies our show. So we got our full-time jobs. That's great. Along with that came company buy-in, which was something that we struggled with, I guess, up to that point. But then that means, we got marketing, we got promotion, we got our jobs, and it allowed us to hire people to work with us, cool people like Menaka.
Yeah, so I joined in 2019 as a fellow, and this is us taping an episode with Gus, our kid co-host, you can see in the bottom corner. And yeah, now we're making 39 episodes a year, and there are even more plans for the show.
That's right. So on top of making the episodes, we do a bunch of spin-off shows that were mentioned. We're always coming up with new ideas, and we want to expand outside of the world of just podcasting. So we teamed up with Little Brown and we wrote the book you see there called It's Alive. It's super fun. It's got like cartoons inside and lots of science and some optical illusions. And then you see there, Marc is dressed as a brain and Molly and I are shooting confetti in the air. That is not just our office, but that is what we do for the live show that we developed. It was a really fun project where we had, near sold out crowd, and we were doing all sorts of science experiments, explaining things right in the epic time for events fall of 2019. We were going to go on tour, and then of course the world had other plans. But now that things are opening back up, we plan to go back out on the road and do more Brains On Live. We also have Brains On en Español, which debuted during the pandemic, and that's a Spanish language version of our show that we've been doing. So we do a lot of stuff. We keep very busy.
Yeah, in 2017, we got a grant with the National Science Foundation to see who was listening to our show, how they were using it, and the impact it was having. We've partnered with the Science Museum of Minnesota on this research, and Amy Grock-Nelson is here today. She'll be available during the Q&A later to answer any questions y'all have about the research we've been doing. But it's been really exciting because at the time there was no research about kids podcast listening, and so this was exciting in the informal science learning field to learn how podcasts would work as a learning tool. Since this first grant, we've received 2 more grants from the National Science Foundation. One was a rapid grant when COVID started that let us study how the information needs of kids and family during the pandemic. And then another grant that's about to kick off that's going to study how families listen in the car.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about the lessons we've learned along the way of making this kids podcast, but a lot of these lessons are kind of like, they go for any podcast. So take what you say and build upon it. If you want to make a kids podcast, these will work. If you want to make another podcast, these will most likely work either straight off of what we're saying or maybe with a tweak or two. So first thing is we're going to talk about figuring out the structure of your show. And then we're going to talk about figuring out who your audience is. Also building a community within that audience and beyond. Diversifying the voices, both on the show and talking about how to always make people welcome and trying to figure out how to grow your audience and make it bigger. So first I'll talk about structure. So we spent a long time trying to figure out how to do the show. As you heard in the introduction, Molly and Sanden and I sort of had this idea that we want to make a show for kids. No idea how to make it. We probably went about everything backwards. So now you don't have to if you listen to this, hopefully, or maybe not as backwards. But what we landed on eventually was kind of like a template, a roadmap for our show. And we've adopted that roadmap, or for every show we've made afterwards, we've sort of made another roadmap. So we'll get to that too. But they all kind of have these basic things. And this is, like I said, just like a lot of shows, the Daily has a roadmap. It's got an intro, an interview, what else you need to know today, and kind of a lot of annoying ads. It's Been a Minute does the same thing. When they've got their intro and interview and who said that, and then the best thing that happened to me. So they've got these like grounding points within the show that they can talk around. And with our show, we have the same grounding points. We like to call them furniture pieces. So I don't know if that's an original term, probably not, but we like to put furniture in the show to like as grounding points. So some examples of our furniture is a cold open, which is where we just kind of have like a little skit that we do based around the topic of the show. It usually involves the characters of Molly, Sanden, Menaka, and Marc, and maybe some other characters. We also have something called the Moment of which is at the end of the show, which is just like a really short question that usually doesn't relate to the show at all, but it's something that kids are wondering and we can answer very quickly. Mystery Sound, which is a super popular segment of the show where we play a sound and somebody tries to guess it. The co-host tries to guess it. and then we play it again later and reveal the answer. And the honor roll, which is something that we've started kind of pretty early, where we just acknowledge the kids who write into us with questions and they send in their own mystery sounds. So we just kind of give them a shout out at the end of the show, and that's proved to be something that's really fun, and it also keeps people engaged, kids listening to the end because they want to hear their name. So having furniture is really important, I think, to any show. It helps, like I said, helps keep give you anchor points, and it helps you give you a really good template to start. So if you know you're going to start with a cold open and you're going to have a mystery sound in the middle, you kind of have to okay, well then we're going to do like an interview here to get us to the mystery sound. So it's less daunting. So you can just kind of fill in the blanks. Let's see, I think that's pretty much it. We can play, you want to play a clip of this is one of the cold opens we did for our Dreams episode, which was really fun. We had a brother and sister, Tessa and Andrew, who were really great co-hosts and actors, it turns out. But here's them acting in the Dreams cold open. I think it's the next page, yeah.
You're listening to Brains On from American Public Media. I'm Molly Bloom, and my co-hosts today are Tessa and Andrew.
Hi, Molly. Hello.
Well, we are really excited to have you here today to talk about dreams.
Hey, Molly, am I interrupting?
Not at all, Sanden.
Because there's totally popcorn falling from the sky right now.
What?
Look out the window.
Cool.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, Tessa and Andrew, what's your favorite kind of popcorn?
I like mine with ketchup.
Did you say ketchup? I happen to have some in my pocket.
Thanks, Marc. I'll put it on the popcorn I have in my pocket.
High fives.
What is going on here?
Look, now it's raining jellyfish.
Run!
Wait, how did we get outside?
Tessa, didn't you hear? Run!
It's raining jellyfish.
Okay.
Good thing I have this umbrella in my pocket.
Where's my umbrella? Why can't I run faster? What is going on?
Tessa!
What?
Tessa!
Huh?
Tessa, wake up. We have to get ready to go to the Brains On headquarters for the taping.
But the jellyfish, didn't we already?
Come on, we're running late.
Do you like ketchup on your popcorn?
Ew, no. Why?
Never mind.
Okay, up and at 'em. Let's go.
I should probably bring my umbrella just in case.
Also, I'll just say before I pass it off, that when Tessa, the girl, says "what" is my favorite moment ever in Brains On. I will sometimes just listen to that just to make myself happy.
Yeah. And as Marc said, furniture is one of the things that we just stumbled on really early as a hack to make it a little easier. There are times when you're doing a show with over 200 episodes like us, like we have, your brain's not always working optimally, but you still have to put out a show that week. And I remember hearing this line from Jesse Thorne, who does the Maximum Fun podcast, that to make life easier for yourself, you put in lots of furniture in a show, because even when you're a zombie, okay, well, we do these 5 things that we always do, and then half the show's done. But we also know kids really like structure. They like things they can look forward to that are repetitive, that they sort of get the sense of mastery over. Like they know the mystery sound's going to come and they can always guess it. I think that's probably true of adults too, to a lesser extent. But that's one of the insights that we got trying to learn to know our audience and find out what they like. And that's something I encourage everyone to do, because I think it applies, to kids' audiences, but all audiences in general. And I know when we say, get to know your audience, it sounds like something I'm sure we've all heard a million times. Any story you've worked on, any podcast, people say, know your audience first. So I'm going to try to give you some nuances into that could maybe help you do a little bit better job, or think differently about how you can figure out who your audience is, and then what you can do to apply that and make content uniquely suited for them. So as Molly mentioned, when we started this show, we didn't know a lot about making kids podcasts. We were kind of starting from scratch. And so getting to know our audience, we thought we knew who they were. We had this sort of vision in mind, maybe a 9-year-old kid parents listen to public radio, kind of grew up in the backseat, listening to All Things Considered. But there was nothing really for them, and they weren't being served by public radio or by podcasting. But we know that this sort of world had a lot of cool content that they'd be interested in. So we started just sort of making it. We started iterating and tinkering. The first couple episodes, we thought, we'd kind of gotten close to what we wanted, and we played it for a bunch of families. And we were, like we said, we're aiming for a 9-year-old, and they told us, yeah, no, not really. It sounds like younger, maybe 4 or 5. And one of the things that we figured out early on that was doing that was our theme song. So, you heard just in that clip that Marc was playing a little bit of our theme song now, but before that we had one that had like a little glockenspiel in it and kids shouting, and it kind of sounded a little like Blues Cluesy. And even though it's a fun theme song, and I still think it's a bit of a banger, we decided that it was sort of inviting a younger feeling right from the top. And I think kids who are older were hearing that and thinking, oh, this isn't for me. And so we changed the theme song, made it something a little more like upbeat and a little like not as sort of tied to a specific age or sound. And I think that helped a lot, because now, we know that like our core audience is like 7 to 9, somewhere in there. So I think that kind of helped age us up a bit to the demographic we were looking for. But then we also did a lot of work with putting out Google surveys with our listeners. We do it maybe several times a year, just to find out about who they are, what they care about, kind of, what their parents are into, how they found the show. So, we had these ideas of the niche our show could fill, and then we also got feedback. And then when we got feedback that didn't fit the picture we were thinking, we would change things and build different furniture around what we thought the kids might want. One of the things that really changed early on too was our original shows were just kind of these sweeping takes on a topic like eating, sleeping, growing. And, that was, I think that feels a little preschool too, as well, sort of a big topic like that, just kind of taken on full force. And what we ended up switching to was answering kids' questions. We got a couple questions from fans, and we thought, well, this is much more specific. And also it feels like, there's a point when I think kids go from sort of wanting to be told how things work to wanting to know specifically what they're curious about. And we wanted to feed that curiosity more and get kids more active in it. So that was another thing we were hearing. This was someone sent us a question. I don't think we were thinking we were going to make it a question-centric show, but I think kids started sending them, and we were like, well, this is better than what we'd originally planned. So that was another way we were picking up cues from our audience and sort of fitting the segments to that. Next slide, please.
Can we also say before we move on that these are all kids who listen to our show, and they've these pictures. And so, one of the things too that we're lucky about, like Sanden said, we just hear a lot from our audience anyway. So this, this kid in the middle bottom right here, this is a painting he made after he listened to our episode about how the universe is expanding and what's beyond the edge of the universe. And this kid in the top left made like a kinetic thread shirt and came to our live show.
You can see at the very bottom there, it lights up. His shirt's got little lights on it.
Yeah, and these kids in the bottom left, they made an elevator. So it's really fun to make stuff for kids. And I think that's something to remember. They're like the best audience to make stuff for.
I think that is one thing that is unique to our show. Having worked on most of us we've all worked on other public radio shows and podcasts that are not for kids. And the majority of the mail that comes in is usually pretty negative, and and people are trying to tell you why you're wrong. But for our kids, doing a kids show is amazing, because I would say like 99% of the mail is just like gushing love. So it's hard to get angry with your audience and not do stuff for them when you get that kind of reaction.
Right. And so one of the things that we were really fortunate to do was to work with the National Science Foundation and the Science Museum of Minnesota to do some actual research into our audience. And that has yielded a lot of great insights that changed our show and the way we did approach things. And one of the big takeaways, there's a whole bunch, and you can find it on our website if you want to dive into it. But one of the big things that stood out to us early on was that the majority of our audience are listening in the car. Like a vast majority, as you can see in the slide here, have at some point or often listen in the car. And that may seem like a small insight, but what we really tried to do, and what I encourage you to do when you get any data point about your listeners, anecdotal or otherwise, is to think, what can we do with that to serve them better? And so for us, thinking about our families in the car, we know this is a very common time for families to be together. They're commuting either to school or soccer practice or on a road trip. We knew was something that was happening a lot. And we thought, how can we serve them better? So one of the things we realized was that, in a car, you can't write things down. You're not exactly near a computer. So telling people to go sign up and Google things might be kind of difficult. So we started really simplifying the call outs we did, simplifying the language we used for how to get in touch with us. So instead of saying you can email us or tweet us or Instagram, we started saying all the time, just go to brainson.org/contact. And we'd say it over and over and over again so that you'd remember that. It would almost sit in your head like a song that gets stuck in your head. And so when you get home and it's time for you and you're like, oh, what about that question you wanted to ask Brains On? You just say, oh, it's brainson.org/contact. Another thing we started doing was really doubling down on little games that you could play in the car. So we do more quizzes. We have the mystery sound, which Marc mentioned is really popular. And we thought, well, these are things everybody in the car can play and do together. And sometimes we even say, hey, pause here if you want to take some time to discuss it with your family, and then come back and you'll hear the answer or something like that. We do that a lot with Smash Boom Best too, our spin-off debate show, where we say you can pause here and think about who won the round. And that's one way that we sort of think, okay, if you're in the car, you're already natural pod for discussion because you're not listening on headphones a lot of the time, or you're listening in a group. And so that's an important thing to consider. And another thing we did was thinking, okay, if you're in the car, you don't want to be too annoying because the parents are the one who have to put you on. And anybody who's driven in a car with a kid listening to like endless hours of Kids Bop or something, that some kids content can be kind of grating, and the parents will be the ones who say like, why don't we put something else on? And so we thought it would be really good to sort of both make it something that kids would like, but also parents could like and hopefully tolerate as well. So we put in a lot of jokes that we think only the parents might get, references, to stuff in the 80s, which is ancient history to kids, or, we parody things that they might understand. And the kids don't seem to mind. And I think it makes the parents feel like included, that like, we know you're listening to and thanks kind of thing. So there's a lot of insights like that we got to help change our show. So I encourage you that if you get some kind of nugget of insight, think, what can I do to tailor this even more? If your listeners tend to be at the gym, is there a way that you can like put in little bits of like speed up the music so they can run faster? Or if they tend to be in the kitchen cooking, maybe there's something you could do around that. Or if you know that they're at work listening as a form of company, maybe there's like extra things you can do to invite them in to having that friend that they're looking for in the podcast. So yeah, that's one thing I would highly recommend. Next slide. And then another insight we got from our listeners, we were noticing that when COVID struck sometime in 2019, early in the beginning of the year, that kids were setting a lot of questions, and obviously we all did have a lot of questions. I think that was something you just saw around the world. But kids are a special audience because they're not often told what's going on, but they pick it up through osmosis, through hearing in the news or hearing what their parents are saying. And we thought, well, this is a time for a show like ours to really stand up and do something. So we worked with the National Science Foundation and the Science Museum of Minnesota on a rapid grant to just study what kids were worried about, what they were interested in around COVID. Here you can see some of the things that they were concerned about. And that gave us a template right there. Like, we could do something about this. We can help answer these questions. We started making episodes before we did this research. I think we had one or two before we did this research because we knew there were things kids would want to know. But this helped us even more sort of figure out what questions they had. And as things changed, what questions were coming up that they didn't have before. So early on, it was a lot of things about how do viruses work? How do you protect yourself? And so we really focused on that. We created these two characters you can see over here, Kara and Gilly. Kids love them. They're two viruses that host a podcast called Going Viral. They're based on, this is for the adults in the room. We based it off of Karen and Georgia from My Favorite Murder, and they kind of have a similar vibe to their show. Obviously, I don't think a lot of kids listen to that, but I think we got some parents who said it's so funny to hear one of my favorite podcasts parodied in kid form. It's something we picked up. Sesame Street does that a lot too, and we think it's fun both for us and for the parents. But yeah, later on, we transitioned to doing more stuff about vaccines because kids were asking a lot of questions about that, or about masking, or why some people don't mask, or we just noticed kids had a lot of anxiety, so we started doing stuff around stress levels and how to manage that. So again, change with your audience, keep pinging them, trying to find out more, asking them questions, watching the tweets that come in, whatever it is, and you will get insights, and you can change your show. You can build around that. And I think you'll see that it really makes them feel served, and they don't get bored with it, and they'll keep coming back.
Yeah, and another big piece of feedback that Brains On gets just repeatedly is that kids love hearing from other kids. So these are all kids who have co-hosted episodes with Molly. Every episode has a kid co-host. And all of them have pretty much asked a question, if not the question that the episode is focused on, a different question. So we're bringing the audience in at the same time. And that's a big way that we build community around the show, is ask kids for responses and bring the audience in so that kids send stuff and they know that it'll play on the show and they're excited to send things in. And it just like strengthens this loop of like, can we have feedback? And they're like, yes, of course you can have feedback. So the three big things, this is on the next slide, that we do in terms of building a community around the show are, asking kids for feedback, and not just surveys. We ask, like Sanden mentioned, we have call outs in every episode that relate to sort of like a future episode, like 3 or 4 weeks down the line. And then kids send in their responses, and their responses play in the episode that they're relevant to. And we'll play one of those in just a second. And also, because we have a co-host on the show talking with Molly and playing games with Molly, there's this model for kids to imagine themselves participating, and also to like know what it sounds like to send in their response to the show. So kids pick up on, there's a format that kids all pretty much use to to send in their questions. That's like, hi, my name is blank from blank, and my question is. We get lots and lots of recordings in that same format because kids are happy to sort of like follow the model that other kids have set and that the co-host sets. And with featuring audience members as co-hosts and also in short recordings and these montages in the episodes, we want everyone to sound really good. So when we get short recordings, we want to make sure that there's not background noise. And if there is background noise or they're recorded and they like are a little stumbly, we'll just ask for another recording, because we want kids to hear themselves and be like, oh, that's me and I sound great. And with co-hosts too, we like to record in studios when we can. But this year we have been recording remotely, and with recording remotely, Marc set up this awesome system for us to send them a microphone and a recorder at home, and also a very easy to follow tip sheet so that kids and their parents can essentially audio engineer themselves at home over a Zoom recording to record episodes. So even this year, we've managed to like have kids still be in episodes every time. And then on the next slide, we have one of those examples of the montages of what we've asked kids for. So we asked kids for banana jokes for an episode about bananas.
Why did the banana look pale? Because it wasn't peeling well.
What do you get when you cross a banana peel with another banana peel? A pair of slippers.
Yeah, so the montages are super fun, and we want them to be really fun to listen to, because it's really exciting for kids and for audience members, I think, of any show, to like hear themselves or hear people like them featured on the show. It's a nice thing about audience show, sort of crosstalk feedback. And another part that we pay lots of attention to in terms of building a community around the show is whose voices we hear from. So these are all experts that we've featured on different episodes of Brains On, and we think a lot about who we're featuring as an expert on Brains On, particularly because we're representing science to kids, but this is important for any show. And so we keep track of sort of like gender, race, geography, demographics for co-hosts and also for expert voices, because we want to welcome in lots and lots of different kinds of people, and we want people to hear lots and lots of different voices on the show, talking about normal stuff, talking about their expertise, all of those things. So we're always like keeping that in mind, and it's totally worth it to make sure that like a very broad range of guests and experts gets featured on the show. And in terms of feedback, we hear from parents pretty regularly how cool it is for their kids to be listening to scientists who are people of color, who are women, who are from other countries, who are just from different parts of the country that they're like from where their kid lives. So that's all part of sort of like the community around the show and the feedback that we get about it.
And I just want to add one thing about the community aspect that actually just occurred to me when you were talking to me, Nick. Was one reason I think you should take that, think about that really deeply, is that it seems like more and more podcasting is kind of moving into a space where I think a lot of the monetization is going to be around having really loyal listeners who are going to help support you. Because it's, the advertising is only one piece of that, but I know that Apple just released its new platform where I think there's going to be additional content people can subscribe for a lot of podcasts, and in other places are on Patreon. So yeah, I think one of the reasons to really think about how you can bring that audience in, get them really involved, get their voices in the show, and make them feel part of a community is for the viability and sustainability of your podcast too. So, and that just sort of occurred to me thinking about all the recent news around that stuff. But I think it makes it even more important, not just for a good show, but if you want to sort of be able to fund the show and keep it going, that's one key aspect.
Yeah. And our mantra is making science feel like a party everyone is invited to. And so part of that is, we want to invite listeners in every episode because, we know there are listeners who listen to every episode and have been listening to us for years. But we know that there's a good chance that our most recent episode on top of the feed will be the first episode that anyone ever hears. If they're, if they heard about us from a friend, they read about us in an article, they're going to find us in their podcast app and listen to whatever our most recent episode is. So it's really important for us to have that episode that's at the top of our feed be as welcoming to new people as it is to previous listeners. So a few ways that we do that is, we're not assuming prior knowledge, whether that's about our characters on the show. We have a character named Harvey, who's basically our headquarters AI who talks to us. We kind of reintroduce him every episode he's on in a really quick shorthand. But also not assuming prior knowledge about science and topics we've done in the past. This is also useful for grown-ups. I think, people sometimes might be embarrassed to admit they don't know something, especially when it comes to things that are in the news like vaccines. So it's important for us to kind of do a quick recap of what we've learned before for everybody, because we don't want to assume that they've heard us or listened to those earlier episodes. Another thing to think about too in relation to this is who's the secondary audience. So our primary audience has always been kids and their grown-ups. But there's also a secondary audience that we know of schools. So teachers are using our podcast in their classrooms, and that's a different audience, and they have different reasons for using it. And also libraries, after school programs, they're all using the podcast in different ways. So we're trying to welcome them in and have resources on our website for them as well. And so, we've been talking about Brains On mostly here, but we've also developed a few other shows for kids as a team. We have Forever Ago, which is our show about history hosted by Joy Dolo, where we look at the history of an object. So whether that's sandwiches, shoes, or video games. Julie's Library, which is hosted by Julie Andrews and her daughter, Emma Walton Hamilton, is about, reading and books. They read different children's books to the audience. Million Bazillion is a show that we developed with Marketplace about teaching kids about money matters. And then Smash Boom Best, which is a debate show for kids and families. We're going to do a little quick case study of Smash Boom Best here just to show you how we do develop new show ideas. So Smash Boom Best started because we did these episodes on our show Brains On that were called Versus episodes, and we did bridges versus tunnels, fire versus lasers, and dolphins versus octopuses, and they were really popular with our audience. They had a lot of downloads, but they also had a lot of engagement. We had kids voting on who was their best. We had them sending in who they thought won, and it was really fun. Kids were asking us to do more of them, so we said, hey, why don't we do a spinoff? So when we started thinking of what a spinoff would be like, we kind of asked ourselves these three questions, which you'll hear, we're very informed by our process making Brains On. Who's the audience? So for Smash Boom Best, we decided that audience was a little bit older than the Brains On audience. And again, mostly kids and their grown-ups. The furniture is different rounds of debate. Each round has a fun name, and it's proven very sticky with our audience. Kids can do this at home. They know all the rounds, and they can make up their own at home and play with their parents. And then who are the voices on this show? So we knew we wanted, again, kids' voices represented, and they're represented as the judges on the show. And then we wanted funny adults to be the debaters. So we have public radio people, we have comedians, people on Brains On. Those are the people on the show. So then we piloted it. We didn't know what it was called, so we called it Thing versus Thing. It's not the best name. And we wrote a script. We brainstormed different round ideas. This is a little snippet from our very first draft. We recorded it, we listened to it, and we said, okay, this needs some help. We need to fix a few things. So here's a couple examples. This is
From the brains behind Brains On, it's Smash, Boom, Best.
A show for people with big opinions.
Smash, boom, best.
that was our intro to the show we had originally. And this is what we ended up with.
From the brains behind Brains On, it's Smash, Boom, Best.
A show for people with big opinions.
So you can hear, the words are the same, but the sound is different. So that's something that's really important to us, is like what the sound of the show is and what that sound is telling our audience. So for this, you can hear the voice is a little more, is less goofy, more serious. The music behind it is a little cooler sounding, a little less kid-like. And that's what we were trying to get across, that it was for a slightly older audience.
And Molly, you can see too that's the fourth version of the intro. So we had that was when it was kind of almost getting there, I guess.
Yeah,
there were other even worse versions, not even less right versions.
And we should point out Marc is the person who does a lot of our sound design, and he's the
and the music.
And the music. So he's written a lot of this music and crafted a lot of our sonic IDs that we have throughout our shows.
From the brains behind.
Okay. So then here's another example of some tweaking we did. So in Smash Boom Best, we introduced these new shorter rounds. We didn't really quite know what to do with them or what to call them. We knew one would be a surprise to debaters.
First, it's time for a micro round. All the action in less the time. Every micro round is unique, and this one is also a total surprise to each side. This time, your round is haiku.
Okay, so that went through a few more iterations, and this is what we finally ended up with.
All right, now it is time for
Sneak Attack.
We like our debaters to think on their feet, so the sneak attack round is always a total surprise to both sides. They aren't prepared, they don't know what's coming, so let's not keep them waiting anymore. Ladies, your challenge today is haiku.
So that, something we've realized when we develop new shows is that we need more signposting than we think we need, because we are in it, we are making it, we know what's coming, we know where we're going. So we're kind of in it. But one thing that's always helpful is to add more signposts, help the audience through the show. And so with these sonic stingers, like you heard, the ha-ha, hoo-ha, sneak attack, that's really key in cluing listeners into where we are in the show.
Molly, I'll just say one thing that I was reminded of too during that is that when we were first trying the show out and piloting it, Molly was a host, and Molly was used to hosting Brains On, and there's like a certain vibe that she has, which is great. We love it. We love Molly. But for Smash Boom Best, because we wanted it to be a little bit older of an audience, we had to get like a little bit faster paced, quicker moving vibe, like a little more game showy. So we worked with Molly, and you can hear it a little bit in those two examples, I think. The first one versus the last one. We call it Mocha Molly, because Molly Molly drinks some mocha. Or she used to, but now she can do it. She can turn it on just like that.
Call it up. But yeah, at the beginning I needed caffeine and sugar to get there. Sure. I'm naturally a more laid back person. And
first, it's time.
All right,
for
now okay. So then we put out the episodes, and then we keep, refining even after the show is out. So after our first season of Smash Boom Best, we wanted more learning, because sort of like Brains On is probably like 80% learning, 20% silly, maybe more than that. But the ratio for Smash Boom Best is sort of flipped. It's like a little more silly and a little less learning. And so we wanted to inject a little more learning into Smash Boom Best. And so we thought, it'd be really great to talk about like debate and logical fallacies and what makes a good argument. And so we developed a segment that's now in the middle of the show. It's usually about 2 minutes long, called State of Debate. That is like a fake like sports cast. We have Todd and Taylor, who are two expert debaters who play clips from very silly debates and analyze them and call out the logical fallacies they see. They've proven really fun, and they're very popular with our audience as well. And then we also got the chance to develop Julie's Library with Julie Andrews and her daughter, Emma Walton Hamilton. And again, we asked the same question. So who's the audience for this? It's a little bit younger than Brains On. The furniture for this show that we developed is we have Every episode, Julie leads the audience to her reading nook, introduces the book, obviously the books, and then at the end of the show, we always have wonderful words. So that's again a call out that we can hear kids' voices during the show, and the audience always knows they can be sending us their wonderful words throughout the show. And the voices are, of course, Emma and Julie, and then the kids and the authors. Oops, let me play that clip. Is the clip here, Mark? Where is it?
It's on the last page, I think.
Next slide?
Yeah.
Oh, there it is.
Hello, I'm Julie Andrews, and I'm so glad you're here. In my mind, the most wonderful place to be is one where books are nearby. Maybe you have a tall stack on your bedside table, or a backpack that holds some favorites. Or maybe you go to a library like the one I'm in and stand among bookshelves full of lovely... My absolute favorite spot in the library is our reading nook. It's the perfect place to snuggle in for story time.
With cozy pillows all around.
A glowing lamp shines its light on the pages.
There's a squishy rug under our feet.
And we like to save space in a comfy armchair for any friendly monsters that may drop in for a visit.
You never know.
Now that we're all settled in, let's open today's book. Marilyn's Monster by Michelle Knudsen.
Speaking of wonderful, before we go, it's time for
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful word.
So that is a little sample of that show. We're going to take some questions now, but you can always contact us anytime. We love to talk to people about making stuff for kids. We love it a lot. Here are our email addresses and our website and our Twitter.
Hello, thank you so much. That was amazing. I did not think that there was so much to know about kids programming. So we have got a bunch of questions that have come in, and so I'm hoping that I can just read some of these off to you. We've got a first question from Matthew. They say, I heard you made a podcast with Julie Andrews. How did it feel to work with such Hollywood talent?
You want to take this one, Sanden? You don't need to.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go first, but then you should add, Molly, because you worked a lot with her and her daughter as well. I was there in the beginning when we were starting out prepping that show, and this is like top moments of my life, maybe like top 3. Julie invited us all to her house to have a spot of tea and work on the show and talk about what we might want to do. And that was super amazing. So I remember driving all the way out. She lives on Long Island somewhere. And we went to her house, and it was just really nice. And she was very sweet. She had 2 dogs. I think they were golden doodles. And I remember at one point we're drinking tea, and she literally was like, would anybody like a spoonful of sugar with their tea? And then we all died because it was the best thing that ever happened. So she was just a really great partner. And she and her daughter are both super devoted to education. Specifically, her daughter, Emma Walton Hamilton, works a lot with kids' books and teaches like how to write for kids. And so, it was really fun. They were always just so professional, but, they also were very dedicated. And they had a lot of opinions about like, how do we really make this educational, get the right tone and stuff. So, we're so used to doing things based on our own guts. And this was one of the first times we had sort of like an external partner who had their own vision and stuff. So yeah, it was really fun. And it was great to hear their expertise, and given their years and years of experience in this field, we were learning as much from it as I'm sure they were about our expertise in audio. Molly?
Yeah, definitely. I think, they were really great partners that we got to learn a lot from. And I did not get to have tea with Julie Andrews. So that's still one of my goals in life.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You should have been there. She called kombucha at one point, which is super cute. And they gave us little sandwiches. And in the bathroom, there were monogrammed towels. I mean, the whole thing was just...
What a joy. We have a question from somebody who's also named Julie. They're asking, what is your budget for the show? Is that something that you're at liberty to talk about?
That's a good question. We don't really know the full budget for the show. We don't manage it. Our executive producer, Beth Perlman, does. But we do have like certain amount of money that is available to us for like ISDNs, to send recordings, to work with freelancers. So there is like a pool of money that's in addition to our salaries, but we don't have a lot of extra money for other stuff besides just our time.
And I'll say too that the grants, the NSF grants, ended up paying for some of our salaries and some of the, the extra stuff and videos and stuff we were able to put out. So that was, get a grant if you can.
Right. Julie asked another question. Do you compensate your guests?
We don't. It's like, so our show is, it's science journalism. So we interview them as sources for stories.
We do pay occasionally voice actors.
Mm-hmm.
But even that, a lot of it is just the way our show grew, like sort of organically from just the three of us doing it kind of in our free time. We have always just sort of asked friends and family, coworkers a lot when we were in a building together to help do voices. And that's kind of mostly how it's remained, although sometimes we'll get paid voice actors.
The people we pay are like freelance reporters who work with us.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've been able to commission a few songs for the show, so we've paid musicians as well.
Ooh. Okay, we've got some more questions here. Erica has a great question. What advice do you have for kids wanting to create their own podcasts and the teachers that are getting them started?
That's a great question. Yeah, we've had a bunch of podcasts that have been sort of inspired by, Brains On and Smash Boom Best, and teachers using it in the classroom. There's a lot of great free stuff you can use to make podcasts. We've done 2 behind the scenes episodes where we link to a bunch of resources. Marc, do you want to talk about where the best place to find the resources?
Yeah, I mean, probably if you're here, you probably know some of these, but like, AIR is a great place to go and get resources. Transom.org is amazing with like articles from basic beginning steps all the way to like super pro steps. So you can always find something there. The NPR training site is great. The thing that I recommend to people too a lot is that you can get in touch with pretty much any podcast person you want to by just emailing them. And chances are, unless they're like that 0.5% of the most popular podcasts, they're going to get back to you. It might take them a bit, but they're like, I'm always amazed when I find out that somebody's listened to our show. So I make it a point to get back. I mean, you put it out there and you kind of move on to the next thing and forget about it. But like, it's great to hear from people. So I think if you have a question, especially a specific question on like, if it's how to do Pro Tools or some other audio thing, or like just have a burning specific question, email that person. They will likely get back to you.
Yeah, and that's such a great question because I think we all have different insights on it. My thought immediately was, making a podcast is a great writing assignment. So if you are a teacher or a parent and you want your kids to express an interest in this, think of it first. I mean, all our episodes start with research and then we write the scripts out. Some parts of it are improvised and some parts of it are interviews and stuff like that. But it's a great way to get a kid thinking both creatively and to learn research. We know that there are a bunch of teachers who've used Smash Boom Best as a model for lesson plans because both sides have to research their arguments and then come and present them. And we actually have stuff on Smash Boom's website where you can find resources on how to do that yourself. But I would say if you have a kid in your life who wants to make a podcast, like, let's do it. First step, let's figure out what it's about and then write it. And, like the same things we said, do the structure, come up with some of their own furniture. That's always fun. You guys can brainstorm and then do your research and then fill out those segments and then record it and all that stuff. But it's a really fun project. And I highly encourage, even if you only do one episode, I think it's a great learning experience. Menaka, do you want to add anything too?
Yeah, I would also add from the recording standpoint of recording, like with kids and like in a big group, like a classroom or something like that. We obviously we like to record in studios and we try to send around kits when we record episodes, but we also feature a lot of iPhone voice memo recordings. Like you can make pretty good recordings with a smartphone. I'm sure like lots of people here are very familiar with that. But really simple things like recording on soft surfaces rather than hard surfaces and just like in a quiet place. Or recording in a scene where you can like hear the outside and you're talking about the outside is nice too. So yeah, the recording does not have to be that complicated. And there's free editing software out there. Audacity is pretty good. So
I'll say one more thing too, is that it doesn't have to be the best. Like it can just be two people talking. It can, or like if you want to get super fancy, put some music in, you know, like you just start. It doesn't have to be like, it doesn't, even if you like our show and you like the sound of our show, that's great. But just start somewhere where you're just have somebody talking and go from there.
Great, thank you so much. We have an anonymous attendee who is asking, who asks, curious how you recruit learners that co-host and what their role and time commitment is during the podcast development. I know you talked about just sort of like asking people in your lives, but how do your kid co-hosts come to you?
So at this point, the kid co-hosts are pretty much all listeners of our show who have written to us. So when we're doing, if we have picked a kid's question for that to be the featured question in the episode, we will often reach out to them if they're old enough to see if they're interested in co-hosting. So, our age range is for co-hosting is 9 to, 13 about. So sometimes we have kids who are 6 who have sent in questions who are not, we'll still feature the recording of their question, but they're not quite old enough to co-host yet because they do have to be pretty comfortable reading out loud. But, so if the kid is too young, we'll look at other kids. We have a database of all the kids who have written to us. We get hundreds of emails a week. So if there's a topic, there is likely a kid in our, database of people who have sent us questions who have a similar related question who's old enough to co-host. So they're really all listeners of the show, which is super fun because they are very familiar with the show and they know how the show works. They're excited to do the mystery sound and all of those things. And we've had kids listen to the show in Sweden who have been our co-hosts, and in where else have we had?
Aussie England.
Yeah, so all over the world. It's super fun. And we want them to sound like themselves. So like we don't really coach them overly much. I basically talk to them on the phone once and chat with them about the topic, see kind of what they're most interested in exploring related to that topic. And then we do an hour-long taping. And as part of that hour-long taping, sometimes there's an interview for them to do, but we basically contain their involvement to that taping. And then we send them the script, of course, ahead of time as well, so they can familiarize themselves so they're not doing cold reads during the day. But it's not a very big time commitment for them.
And I would say when we were starting out, it was a lot harder because we didn't have that many people writing in with questions, and we just didn't have that big of a pool of kids to choose from. So we ended up reaching out through our social networks and friends and family. So there was a lot of people that we knew or knew indirectly that were coming and helping. So tap your friends and family.
That gives me a question is, if you're getting hundreds of emails, how are you managing this inbox, sourcing from so many different listeners?
We do read them all. We can't find all of them though. So we do, we use Salesforce to manage all of it, and we like tag them as we're reading them. If there are like really, fascinating questions that we want to remember for our next editorial meeting, we can tag them there. If there are questions that we think will make for a good moment of we pull them out and put them in a separate moment of document we have going. So they're like really key to our show, and we wish there was a time where we did respond to every single one, but as the number grew, we just couldn't do it anymore. It still kind of breaks my heart that we can't, but it just got to be, it could be a full-time job to respond to the emails.
Yeah, and before we had Salesforce, which I know is a sort of expensive thing that maybe not everyone can afford, we just used Google Docs, and I think we had a Google spreadsheet where we put all the questions, the kid's name and their email address, and that got up to several thousand, or at least several hundred, I think, before we switched. So we used that for a number of years. And yeah, I think, once every quarter or so, we get together and we look at all the most recent questions that have come in, and it's usually like a list of 100 or so, maybe more. And we go through and find our favorites, or the ones we see keep coming up, or the ones that sort of are really interesting. We're like, oh, I don't know how to answer that, or the ones that we think, oh, I think I know an answer for that, but it's complicated. The ones that kind of just jump out at us. And then we usually build episodes around that. But we vote, we have a whole thing with whiteboards, and we sort of lay them all out, make sure we're not doing too much biology or too much physics or whatever, and then figure out episodes based on that. So yeah, it's a process, and we deal, we love that our fans reach out so much, but it is, we because we don't want to forget or neglect, we do have to kind of keep track of all of them and see, and we also pull those same names for the honor roll when we shout them out. So that was an important thing to sort of figure out the structure of how we handle and manage all that for our show.
Awesome. Well, I have a question from Willow, who has a question about when you were a little bit smaller. When you were first producing the show and presumably had a small-ish audience, did you have trouble getting enough feedback or input from kids who were listening? And how did you get around that? Did you handpick kids to reach out to specifically and ask them to weigh in?
I think you'll hear in those first episodes, before we had a lot of listeners, that we had kids who were featured more as topic experts. So we like interviewed kids who were really into cooking, and we talked to them about cooking. We interviewed kids who were like the tallest and shortest in their class about what it was like to be the tallest and shortest in their class. So we treated them more like experts. And we didn't really have the montages that we were able to do later on in the show when we had more listeners. And I think, for new shows that we've developed, like Million Bazillion and Julie's Library, we do have montages in those shows, but we've relied at the beginning on the Brains On fans to help us populate those montages. So I think there are creative ways to involve kids' voices without having like a large volume of them. And we did to find like community events where we could go with a microphone and a recording kit and ask kids like a question. So there were a few episodes where we had call outs we wanted to do, and we would just go and be like, what do you think about this? And interview kids. And of course their parent had to be there to give permission and all of that. But, would interview them just out and about in the world.
I think one thing go ahead.
I was going to say that Smash Boom Best, early on, we got a lot of our ideas, and like kids would, before the pandemic, we would go to things like 826 organizations, which are writing organizations that a lot of cities have. And we would interview kids like, who do you think would win, Godzilla or King Kong, or what's cooler, tacos or pizza? And those montages were featured at the top of every episode in Smash Boom Best, because, and those kids weren't listeners, early on, because the show was brand new. But they got into it, and that gave us a chance to put kids' voices in there. And yeah, we did. I mean, we use a lot of friends and family, especially early on. But I'd say just, if you know some of the kid, Marc's daughter, Coco, must have like 1,000 cameos in the show, because she was the first kid of any of our staff to be able to talk. So, that's part of it. It's like, if you just have one or two people, it's great to, just keep using them and getting them involved in different ways until they're tired of doing it. I think that's still valid. That's still a listener and still a kid. It's still somebody who, other kids will hear and respond to.
I was going to say, in the beginning, when we didn't have that many voices, and like Molly was saying, we kind of treated the kids as experts. I think that was really key for us, because without ever having to explicitly say this is a show for kids, not parents, but we want parents to listen to. Like, we never explained our show like that. It's a show for kids, driven by kids. And because we had kids' voices on there, kids responded. Like, when kids are listening to other kids, then they're like, oh, I immediately know what to do. I'm curious. This is like, it's not an adult talking down to them. It's just kids. We try to make it as much as possible kids leading the way. So we I don't know how early it was, but we started getting questions pretty early on, maybe after like 3 episodes or so. And the first question we got in from a listener is, we turned around and made that a show. How does paint stick?
That's great. We've got a message from Katie Stone, who I believe is the host of a show called The Children's Hour. She says, I really love the work that you do. Thanks for sharing your tips. How do you survey your audience? Do you use a professional surveying organization or platform?
Well, this would be a good time for Amy Graff Nelson to talk a little bit about the research.
Sure. And I know, and Sanden, I don't know if you want to say something about Kids Listen too, because I know you have a survey through that. So for the research we have that's funded by NSF, we wanted, part of that was a survey of listeners. And what's hard with podcasts is you don't have a list of people who are signing up and downloading your podcast. So there's not a list pre-made that you can just send it out to. You might have a list of, like, Brains On has a newsletter where people have signed up. But for our research, what we did is we just wanted as many people as we could to sign up to participate in our survey so that we could get a broad range of listeners. And so what we ended up doing for the research is we created, like Molly mentioned earlier, to create, because we knew people were listening in cars and listening in places where they may not be able to write it down, to create like an easy hashtag to remember, or an easy web address to remember that they could go to and sign up to participate in the survey. And so I think it was like Brains On /supernova was the first one we had. And the other one, I think, we had another one. And we advertised that in the beginnings of or during the Brains On episodes, through the newsletter, on social media, lots of different places to just get as many people as we could to sign up. And we sent them to this web address where they had to sign up and say that they were an adult or over a certain age because of COPA regulations. And then we sent them a survey. And so then they were also part of this group that we could then email later to survey. And we ended up getting, for some of our studies, like 1,000+ people that signed up to participate. And then our response rate would be like around 500 or so people. But that was one way we did it. But I know Kids Listen also does a survey, and I don't know if you have different strategies for that.
I can't believe I haven't brought up Kids Listen yet. Kids Listen, if you haven't heard of it, it's a great organization that I was a part of for a long time, a board member. I did a lot of research. It's basically a grassroots community for anyone who wants to make a kids podcast. We have a Slack channel that's active. We have, trainings and webinars and like this one, but specifically about, different kid shows. And we share advice and concerns and gripes and, great fan feedback and all that stuff. And one of the things that we did that was really important to us was to start getting a better sense of who are the listeners for kids podcasts. And Kids Listen is made up of like over 50 shows, maybe even 100 at this point. So it's a wide range from fiction-based shows to educational shows like ours to music-centered shows. And we wanted to see, like, is there a common audience? And so what we did there is we just created Google surveys. We reviewed what the questions we wanted to ask were, and then we just like hammered it home with all our audiences across all the shows. So we had everybody just say, go in the middle of the show, go to this website and fill out this form if you like our show. And they said it every episode, maybe multiple times, to really get people to stick and realize that this is important to us. And then we put it on our Instagrams and our Twitters, and we had it open for several months to try to get enough responses. And it was a slog. And we, especially early on, we've done 2 of these so far. And I think the first one, we only had a couple hundred responses, but even that much gave us a lot of valuable insight. So if you're just one little show and you're trying to create something similar, I think you really easily could create a Google, survey, and then just for like, say, take 2 months where every episode you're going to say, we really want to hear from you. If you're a listener, please go to this website. It means so much to us. And, I think did we offer awards for the Science Museum of Minnesota one, if I remember correctly?
Like worksheets, like fun, like gamey worksheets that we sent to people. Like a
downloadable PDF kind of thing.
Yeah, where you had to actually finish the survey to get the special thing. So it's a nice incentive. Yeah, sorry, Sam.
Yeah. I was gonna say, you could do something like that too, where maybe, say like, hey, we've got, a special drawing of the character from our show, or, we'll send you, a haiku, a special haiku or whatever it is. If you finish the survey, And then, even if you're just doing this in a low tech way with a Google spreadsheet, you'll get their emails and you can email them right back with that, and you'll get that data. So yeah, I talked a lot about how important the data is, and I know that it's not necessarily easy to get it, but I think a little bit of grit, you can start surveying your audience pretty early on and see who's out there and at least get some responses to work with.
Yeah, another thing we've done in the past too, which is a little bit different, is we've asked people to contact us if they're interested in helping. So, when we were developing new shows, we said, hey, we're working on some new shows. If you want to help us test them early on in the stages, just email us at, hello@brainson.org and tell us that. And so we had a small group of like very excited people who were excited to help us test. And we did the same thing with teachers. Like if you're a teacher who uses BrainSon in the classroom, just email us and let us know that you're a teacher. And so we have a teachers list that we created that same way.
Thank you. Matt asks, what has surprised you most about what kids like and don't like in shows? What surprises you about maturity level or what kids are able to handle?
That is a great question. I'm not going to answer because I think someone else might have a better answer, but I just think that's a great question.
Well, I mean, Menaka, do you want to answer? Or do you want?
Yeah, I can start the answer on that one. I would say, like, because BrainSon works from this like central tenet of like not talking down to kids, I think what's most surprising is just how deep their curiosity is about like such a broad range of topics. Like we get very, very specific questions sometimes, like what mixes with oxygen to turn apples brown. So some kids are super deep into like one thing. And I think like it's nice in a show on BrainSon, you get to represent sort of like all of that curiosity and like explore all of those different avenues. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing too that's really cool is that because this is a show that kids take in with their ears as opposed to reading, like when you're dealing with reading material, you have to think about grade level and like where they're at reading. But kids, for the most part can all, listen to our show no matter what level they're at. And that's why we have like, I think a lot of sibling groups listening together. And we try to speak to kids at like a bunch of different levels. So like for the really young kids who might be in the car listening, we've got like sound effects, goofy stuff. They may not get all the nuance, but like they're picking up on some of it. And then, for the older kids and the grown-ups who are listening, we have quite a bit of detail that's available to them. So like, and we also know that they do repeat listening. So if you make things for kids, kids are going to listen to that thing a lot of times. So you can actually fit in more detail than you think because they will pick up something new every time they're listening to it, which is really cool.
Actually, I'm going to chip in an answer to this one more thing. One thing that I think surprised us and that we've been learning and sort of leaning into in the last almost 2 years even, and it really came to a head with the COVID coverage we did, kids can handle a lot more serious stuff than we expected. And I think I'm obsessed with reading demographics about different generations. So, I love articles, think pieces about millennials versus Gen Z versus, the boomers. And one thing that's come up a lot about the young kids today, and the kids growing up today aren't even Gen Z, they're beneath that, but they're much more socially aware than I think past generations have been. And they're much more concerned about the planet and the environment. And they tend to, I think they're just surrounded by a lot more of these serious issues than a lot of us were as kids. And I think there's a tendency to hide that or shield it from kids. But as Molly said, early on, we really built the show to sort of serve kids and meet them where they are. And I think part of that is getting serious. So we've done episodes on topics that we thought were going to be really difficult. We've done stuff about, big feelings, emotions, anger. And we did an episode about Down syndrome, which we thought was going to be hard. It turned out to be really delightful and fun. We did a lot of stuff about COVID that we thought would be very difficult. And then turns out we could still find a way to talk to kids about it. And every time they've said they really appreciated it. The parents said they appreciated it. And I think kids, this stuff is already in their life. And so we found out that they're willing to go deeper with us and talk about more serious stuff than I think we were comfortable with, even because, we thought they didn't want to hear it, but they were saying we already were, and we just want your help with it.
Yeah, I'll just add on to kind of what Sanden and Molly were saying is that, I mean, I'm constantly surprised, and I don't know why I still am, but like the level at which kids do want to understand stuff. And I think really there's pretty much no topic that's untouchable and at this point basically. I mean, there's just like, we have to figure out the right way to present it. But I think kids often get written off as like too young to understand something. But when you take the time to explain it and explain it in a fun way or in a way that they're interested in, they get it. They really get it.
This next question may tie into this, but Shrikant asks, what is the biggest learning from making a show for kids that you wouldn't have gotten by making a show for adults?
That's a great question. I think some of it has to do with fun, maybe. I think when you're making stuff for kids, you sort of let yourself have more fun. And like, I don't know, I think, when you're making stuff for adults, I think sometimes like we're trying to impress other adults, but like with kids, we're just trying to have fun and like engage them and make it as like engaging as possible. So I don't know if that's something.
I think one of our secret weapons is that it comes on the interviewing side. When we tell people that we are interviewing them for a show for kids, it's a science show, so they're like, okay, it's kind of, it's highbrow maybe, but it's for kids. So like most of the time they will let their guard down too. A lot of them are really playful. We do a lot of pre-interviewing too to kind of vet the guests for that, but it really like helps our guests speak in a way that is not super highbrow and like really helps them explain things. And for most of us too, like we're not scientists by trade, so it helps us, and I think by proxy it helps the other adults in the car or in the room too.
Yeah, Menaka's been really successful at getting the scientists like play along. You should talk about like one of
Yeah, this is one of my favorite interviewing techniques is I just pretend like I'm a molecule. I'm like, okay, I'm a molecule and you're a molecule too. What are you gonna say to me? It's really fun to try to have experts like be playful. And I think sometimes like you can get them to access, like a clearer explanation than they might if I was asking them, just like a straightforward question. And I think the other thing about the humor and the playfulness that we saw in the COVID studies that we did with the Science Museum this year is that, so some kids are really ready to engage with serious topics. And even for kids who might not be as ready, humor goes a long way in sort of like letting them be like, oh, okay, this isn't like so scary. There's still like a little bit of humor. There's still some playfulness here. There's something for me, like I can learn about this big thing, which I think is really helpful. So.
Great. Let's get into some more technical questions. Andrea asks, how do you decide how long each episode of a show is? Like, we know that kids' attention spans, like, can vary depending on age. And so I'm wondering how do you decide how long an episode is?
I'll take a stab at this. Just starting off from the data we have, both from Kids Listen and from the Science Museum, I think the ideal length for an episode is between 15 and 25 minutes. Our episodes tend to go over that, and we've tried many times to try to keep them shorter, and that's something we're still working on. But I think some of that comes from the fact that, you said attention spans, but also I think car ride lengths. That's a big one. It's about 15 to 20 minutes, I think, for a lot of people to and from school or the grocery store. So I would encourage anyone thinking about a show to look at that, try to get in that window, that pocket, and don't make the mistake we do. We often go longer. When an episode's feeling really long, though, we do make a lot of cuts and try to keep it, at least below the 40-minute mark. But the other thing is, if you can't necessarily keep your show short because you have a lot you want to pack in there, like we do, we think a lot about the length of any various segments. So kids do have short attention spans, so do adults. I was a reporter for a number of years, and I think kids have longer attention spans than adults, because adults have so many other things on their minds, and they're driving usually when they're listening, and they're also looking at their phone sometimes, or they're like doing dishes or whatever it is. So one of the tricks I developed as a reporter was within every 30 seconds, I needed to have something change, whether it was like I started talking in a different way, like I put on a voice or whatever, or I had a cut come in that was really surprising, or I added music or a sound effect, but I just constantly wanted to re-engage the ear so it didn't drift off, because it's gonna drift. That's the way brains work. Kids, I think, actually have remarkable focus on that. But even then we think, okay, if this thing's been going on for too long and there's too much talking, how do we mix it up? Can we have a molecule pop up, like Menaka said, and start chatting about what it's like to be a molecule? Or can we put in a stinger or break it up and split this into two so that this talking part spans, a segment with something in the middle, so that your ear is continually being grabbed and pulled back into the podcast. So those are my two answers. Keep it to 15 to 20 minutes, 25 if you can. If you can't, just make sure you're constantly like bringing in new sounds and new things throughout the episode to keep engaging those ears, so that it doesn't feel like it's a really long thing. It just feels like you were sort of going through all these little short fun things.
Super helpful advice. I'm wondering about your production process. What do you send your kits out to the kids, or are you recording virtually, or can you talk a little bit about the kits that you send out?
Yep. We send kits out to kids, and basically they have a Zoom recorder, like the HN1, which is like the cheapest one. I think it's like $100. A USB microphone, a pair of headphones, and like a flash card or something. I think that's already in there. And also like a plug-in battery to charge the recorder while we're recording, because we don't want to run out of recording time, which we have, or battery. But we did a lot of testing, and that's what we settled on. So during the pandemic, it's been great, I think, especially since before, when we were in studios. There were a lot of kids that we wanted to get to be hosts, but we couldn't get them in a studio because of they were just far from studios. And now we can go anywhere, and with pretty reliable results. We usually hop on a phone call or a Zoom chat with them right before the taping or the day before the taping, and make sure their room is set up, make sure they understand all the instructions on how to set up the microphone. But the way I'll tell you, the one thing I stumbled on is like USB microphones with a headphone jack. We don't use them like in a traditional way, where the USB microphone is like both the interface and basically we're using the headphone jack out of the USB microphone and plugging it into the Zoom recorder. So that's our primary recording device. And then we're also recording with the USB microphone into Zoom. So that's our backup recording. So, and with that USB microphone, it sounds pretty good on Zoom. And it sounds, as long as you've got the room, you've done a couple tests with the recorder, it's pretty solid. And you don't have to get like the super expensive USB mics either, I don't think. I think the main thing is just to make sure that you've got something with that's got a separate headphone out that you can take to some other device, like a recorder.
Do people ask to use their own recording kits, like maybe as a part of their learning process, or are you pretty adamant about them using your kit?
If every once in a while somebody will have a setup, like, yeah, we've had people use it. Usually if they're at that point, they're usually pretty familiar with it, but I'll still go through I'll still do a check with them on like how they're running the recording. We ran into a problem once where somebody was recording on Logic, I think, while we were trying to do Zoom, and it turns out that Logic only records at 44.1 and Zoom is 48, and so those two things are incompatible with the microphone's plugged in. That's a little in the weeds, but you try to figure that kind of stuff out beforehand.
Yeah. Willow is asking in the chat, would you be willing to share the tip sheet you sent out about the ideal setup? We can include it with the slides and the video recording if you're comfortable with that. But if you want to send that my way, if you're comfortable sharing, we can include that.
Should just email to you?
Yeah, that would be great. Willow has a tip sheet that she sends out, but is looking for other ways to improve her setup. And yeah, I've got an industry question here that I would love if we could tackle. Dustin asked, since podcasting is heavily based on advertising for funding, I've seen a lot of advertisers being nervous about entering the space since it relies so heavily on endorsements. How have you overcome this obstacle? How do you handle personalized endorsements to convert to advertisers?
Well, we do advertisements on our show. When we're talking to adults in our advertisements. We do sometimes personal endorsements when it's stuff that we're like, okay, actually endorsing. Um, so like Stitch Fix, for instance, I've used for a long time, and I like do say that in the ad. Um, but then, we are able to say no to ads that we feel don't fit our audience and would not serve our audience. And we're like very careful about that, especially around like stuff that we feel is like not scientifically accurate. Like there's a lot of stuff like that. So we will say, that's not a good fit for our show. So it's a lot of like educational stuff, like subscription book boxes and things that are like, also a similarly educational vein. But I think the bulk of our support comes from our listeners, and through membership, which is really important to us. So that's sort of like why we it's important to have such good engagement with your listeners, because they support our show and they keep us going.
Great. Yeah, for most podcasts, I mean, it's always multiple revenue streams, right? It's never just one. Only for the lucky ones, I suppose. Matthew asks, any thoughts about the growth of kids podcasts in recent years? And this maybe will be our last question before we wrap up, just a sort of general industry question. Where do you think that kids podcasting is going?
You want to take that, Sanden?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I feel like my answer for this changes every couple months because it's a very fast growing. I guess the big sweeping answer is that it is still underdeveloped and there's a lot of room to grow in the kids podcasting space. I mean, when you compare the number of kids shows to the number of shows about crime, or the number of shows about news and politics, like it's still dwarfed by those. So I think overall, I would say that we're just going to need to see a lot. I would love to see just a lot more creative takes on how you do this. When you look at, there's this sort of saying in podcasts that any type of show that is popular on TV could make a popular podcast. I'm not sure that's completely true, but I think there's a lot to be said for looking at that. I think with kids shows in general, you look at all the different types of things kids watch and consume, both, on TV and on YouTube and through TikTok. And I think there's formats for shows that could come to the fold in the future along those lines. So I'd love to see more stuff, hosted by kids talking about their lives. I love shows that are like advice shows by kids for kids. I love, there's so much room to play in the fiction space. I think, tweens and teens is a very difficult audience, but I'd love to see more people trying to tackle that because I think that they're dealing with a lot and could certainly use content. And then the other side of this, aside from where it might go in terms of new shows and stuff, there's just a lot of people who don't know about kids podcasts. I think that's the biggest issue the industry faces. And we like to think, at our show being one of the earliest, if not the earliest kids podcast, we think about the idea of rising tide raises all boats. So just in general, the more we can all do to tell people that kids podcasts exist and get them listening to something, anything, I think the more they'll be willing to say, hey, this fits nicely into my life. I like the way that my family uses this and we want more of them. And I think that'll just bring more and more listeners. And we know from some of the research we've done with Amy and the Science Museum and at Kids Listen, we know that there's a lot of untapped audiences too when it comes to sort of, race and demographics like, income level and stuff. People there are out there who could benefit from podcasts who aren't listening and maybe don't know about them. So yeah, I think an awareness campaign is going to be one of the big things and challenges growing this industry in the next 5 years or so.
I think kids, like we've talked about a little bit, like kids are very curious about all sorts of topics. And I think we've said this a lot in the past, but for every adult podcast, there's probably a kid version of it. For every good adult podcast, I mean, even if you want to do a true crime podcast, you can do something like creatively for kids like that. So I think one thing to keep in mind is like there are a lot of kids science podcasts now, or story podcasts, or there's a couple of like breakout kind of types of shows made for kids. But I think if we can think bigger than that too, that's also going to expand the audience. And like Sanden was saying, like the rising tide lifts all boats. So it's gonna bring all the shows into more focus.
Great. Okay, I have one more question. What is the best way to be in contact with the Brains On team?
Send a carrier pigeon. Make sure it's got a little.
That's what I was going to suggest.
Yeah, we put all of our email addresses up at the end of our little slideshow. So it's our first names at brainson.org. So Molly at brainson.org. You can contact any of us. We also have like a generic contact email, hello@brainson.org, that we will also read. So whatever you feel more comfortable. We also
Our contact page.
Yeah. And also brainson.org/contact. So many ways. So let us know.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was so much information packed into 90 minutes. Molly, Marc, Menaka, Sanden, thank you so much for your time and all of the energy that you put into bringing this presentation to life for Air and SoundPath. For those of you still listening, today's presentation was recorded, and we will send out a recording and maybe the slides and a tip sheet to those who have RSVP'd, and you can find it on SoundPath and air.org after the fact. Thank you so much, Brains On team.
Thanks, Aaron, for having us.
Thank you. Yeah.
Super fun.
This was so fun. Bye.
Bye.